Hello guys, I hope you're having a nice week. In today's video we start with a new project, the M4 Sherman from Tamiya in 1:35 scale. In this part I show you the construction and later some custom modifications and add-ons to improve the kit. I hope you enjoy. We begin with the hull. It is quite common with Tamiya kits to have several options during the construction, as here with the differential covers. You can choose between a one-piece cast cover or a three-piece bolted cover. I like the bolted cover better because it gives me more detail later on. The front plate is then glued to the lower hull. And although it looks like there are gaps between them, these are covered with other parts later. The Sherman has some really nice details here, and all those bolts should look really good when they are weathered later. Next come the rear doors, which are found on early Sherman variants. These are not hatches for the crew, however, but an access door to the engine. And since there is no engine in this kit, it is important to leave them closed. The rear plate fits perfectly into the lower hull, as you would expect from a Tamiya kit. These are the external air filters, which consists of a few small parts. They are mounted on either side of the rear plate. The wheels in this kit have the usual seam line in the middle. However, these can be removed quite easily with a sanding sponge or stick. There are polycaps that you can use for the drive sprocket and the idler wheels. I wish this was standard for all new releases from all manufacturers, because even though polycaps are super cheap probably, I think they simplify the workflow enormously. At the drive sprocket you have two options again. I went with the so-called Chrysler sprocket as it looks a bit more detailed. To my understanding, lots of these parts could be found mixed on different versions of Shermans, but I am sorry in advance if I chose the wrong type of wheel or other optional part in my Sherman. When it comes to wheels, you can choose between pressed spoke wheels and welded spoke wheels. I like the welded ones with holes more, because the weld seam inside looks pretty nice. Two road wheels are then attached to these bogies to create the VSS suspension, typical of most Shermans. When building, it is important to attach the wheels in the correct direction, as they have a front and rear that is not identical. The small track support roller is placed behind the track skid. The little hole is not an ejector pin mark, but part of the roller, so don't fill it. And if you only glue the front and back of the suspension mounting bracket here, your wheels will stay movable. You end up with 6 suspensions, 3 for each side. I think they look really nicely detailed, especially for a 1981 kit. Now let's get back to the hull. The engine deck consists of several parts that are fitted into the upper hull. Here too, the fit is excellent and I didn't have to use any putty. The breech of the 75mm gun is fully modeled. but if you put a crew figure in the open turret hatch, it becomes practically invisible. Still a nice thing to have. And the gun barrel is molded from a single piece, which eliminates the problem of aligning the two halves, but forces you to carefully remove the seam line along the barrel. When you assemble the gun and gun mantlet, it is very important that you read the instructions carefully to see which parts need to be glued and which parts should not be glued. The barrel is glued to the outer mantlet, which is then put through the second part of the mantle, but without glue. Then you have to attach the gun breech to both of them, but don't apply any glue to the outer parts, only to the extension of the barrel. Even after multiple tries, my parts would not want to stick together strongly, so I had to carefully apply some super glue to the connection in the middle. After that, all parts held together and I could still change the gun elevation. The periscopes on this old kit are still made of the same plastic as the rest of the kit, rather than a separate clear molded part. But that's okay, because it's still better than the clear plastic panels you get from other companies. If you want to put the commander into the turret, you get this small seat for him to stand on. And then I can close the turret. The best way to do this is to put the two halves together and then use a very thin glue like Tamiya extra thin cement, which will run between the two parts due to capillary action. The gun mantle can then also be placed inside the turret. This Sherman variant only has a single hatch on top for the commander. Later variants added an additional hatch for the loader that sits on the other side of the gun. There is also this hatch on the side of the turret, but I'm not entirely sure what it was for, as it seems to be too small per person to fit through. If you know what it was for, let me know in the comments below. The antenna mount and various other small details are still missing on the turret. Here we have our previously mentioned commander figure. He looks pretty good in terms of details. It is recommended to have the figure ready when adding the hatches, so that you can position it to match your commander's pose if necessary. I also had to extend his seat with a piece of plastic, as it kept sliding around due to his slightly awkward position, but at least he looks natural once he sits in the turret. You also get a couple of figures for the driver and machine gunner, but they look a lot worse than the commander and their poses are pretty simple. So I'm going to close the two hatches and don't put any figures here. I'd also have to finish them completely before I can close the hull, which is a little bit annoying. The headlights are not made of clear plastic either, which is a bit worse than the periscopes, but I will try to make the best of it. The light guards look okay, but are technically a bit too thick for this scale. But their shape is quite complicated, so I've refrained from making my own with metal foil. Now it's time to attach all the engineering tools to the back of the Sherman. Don't forget to install the downward facing exhaust into the upper hull before closing both halves. The fit of the lower and upper halves is really good. But there is one pretty big problem that many of these older Tamiya kits have. They all have a giant hole right here. And while on some kits that's not a problem, on the Sherman it is, because you can still see the inside of the finished tank later if you don't close it up. So I had to cut some plastic cards from polystyrene and fit them between the lower and upper hull. Sherman tanks were reinforced with additional armor plates at key locations where the crew was placed or ammunition was stored. These can simply be glued to the appropriate places. There are very faint markings on the hull and the turret for the correct placement. And with that, the basic out-of-the-box construction is done. But since this is quite a simple kit, we can do some more modifications to improve the details. I start by improving the armor texture with extra thin Tamiya cement. While the turret already has a decent texture, that does not mean we can't improve it more. The cement melts the surface, making it soft. Then I can take an old brush and stipple over some heavier texture. This texture would be the result of the casting process when they made the turrets. Depending on the brush you use, you get different results. So just try out some different ones if you have some spares laying around. And the texture already present on the plastic gives you a nice guide on which parts you can use this technique. Basically, all thicker armor plates featured this texture. There are a few flame cut marks present on the Sherman. I can improve these too by doing multiple cuts, deepening the texture. Once satisfied, I soften the edges again with Tamiya extra thin cement. The armor texture looks quite alright already, but I want to soften it a bit now with Tamiya putty. The putty is thinned with Tamiya's airbrush cleaner until I have a thin mix. Then I apply it to all previously textured surfaces. This evens out the surface somewhat, but the overall texture remains intact. However, I can also strengthen the texture and make it coarser by applying the putty thicker and generally thinning it less. You can also use all these different techniques to distinguish certain areas from each other. Individual panels can be textured more strongly to differentiate themselves from the ones right next to them. The outside of the wheels is made of rubber. I can scratch and cut the surface to simulate damage to the rubber from stones, for example. The tracks included in the box are made of real rubber. They actually look pretty good from the outside, but I wanted to try something new and print tracks made of resin with more detailed individual links. So I counted all the track links and connectors and printed them on my resin printer. I put a few of them together and everything worked great and the track was nice and flexible. But then I realized that the track is not properly designed for the Tamiya Shermans. I don't know if the Tamiya drive wheel is too small or the track links are too big, but the track does not fit on the wheel. And that's pretty disappointing, as the seller of the files never mentioned that this track only works on certain Shermans. At least I can use the tracks later as additional armor, so it wasn't all for nothing. But let's continue with the details. The armor plates on the turret have a few large weld seams. As before, I can highlight these a little with my scalpel. With cast turrets, you can often see larger irregularities from the process. For example, I can make larger scratches in the surface. This would make the surface more interesting later on. I of course want to attach some bags and blankets to the turret later, but for that I need a few more handles. First, I drill small holes at the appropriate distance in the desired places with my hand drill. Then I bend a thin wire into the right shape using my tweezers. Now the handles can simply be pushed through the holes in the turret. I recommend making the handles a little bit longer to ensure a secure hold. Once they are placed at the right distance, I fix everything in place with superglue. The box already contains lots of bags, spare parts and other bits and pieces, so it's not absolutely necessary to buy any extras. In particularly, I like the jerrycans, as both the handle and the screw cap are separate, which significantly increases the level of detail. Now I will show you a very simple trick to upgrade your backpacks and bags with straps. All you need are a few strips of metal foil and superglue. Simply apply the glue to the back and attach the strips so that they are in line with the indicated straps on the plastic part. Once the glue has dried, the strips can then be bent and twisted as if they were real. This makes it much more realistic to attach your bags to the vehicle. I don't really know why, but there is no tow rope in the box. But that doesn't matter, because you can easily twist your own ropes with thin copper wire. To do this, I simply twisted 4 wires, each with a diameter of 0.3 mm into one strand. Now I need 2 towing eyes from my bits box and the tow cable is ready. Copper cables can be laid on vehicles very nicely and realistically because they can be bent into the desired shape. Although the included equipment is nice, I wanted to add a few more details. To do this, I'm using the Allied equipment set from Tamiya. It was very common for Shermans to store a lot of equipment on the engine deck. However, to realistically attach hard plastic parts, I recommend a blanket or tarp made from modeling putty like green stuff or milliput underneath. In this case, I will be using green stuff. First, I mix the yellow and blue parts until I have a uniform green color. This stuff is super sticky, so it's a good idea to sprinkle the work surface and tools with talcum powder before rolling out the mixture thinly. As soon as it's thin enough, I cut out a rectangle. Now I can fold the whole thing up a little and put it on the back of my Sherman. With a few smaller scraps, I can make some more tarps and put them there too. Now all I have to do is press all my hard plastic equipment into the soft blanket. This way they fit perfectly to the surface and look way more realistic. Another small detail to enhance the model are the drain holes on the hull for accumulated rainwater. To do this, I simply drill small holes with my hand drill into the walls of these raised parts. Here I have built a hedgerow cutter from polystyrene sheets. During the operation in Normandy, these cutters were attached to many Allied tanks to make it easier to drive through bushes and hedges. I can use normal Tamiya cement to attach them. Another addition are some wooden logs on the side of the Sherman. I glue some twigs together in a bundle using superglue. To represent the rope that would have held them together in real life, I use some copper wire again. And with that, I think I'm done for this episode. Now let's take a look at what we have done so far. The kit is relatively simple and easy to build, but nothing outstanding on its own. But with a few small modifications, you can turn a regular Sherman into a very nice custom tank. Tamiya sets are always great for such modifications due to their low base price and good quality. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to never miss any future uploads. Any feedback or suggestions, let me know in the comments. Thank you all for watching and see you next time.